Hi there, Dave Levine here. Thanks for joining me for episode 8 of the Sports Stories podcast. It's great to have you with us. Let me take you back to the last episode with Pete Ackley. I posed a question to you. Who are the key people in your network to support you to progress? Or another way of putting it is, who's around your personal boardroom table? Well, today's guest is Manisha Tailor. Manisha has an amazing story and pays tribute to the key people around her personal boardroom table and those that have continued to impact on her life. Manisha also touches on the very important subject of mental health in sport and more broadly, which is timely given its Mental Health Awareness Week. I'm really looking forward to finding out more about her views on mental health, as well as the transition she has made from teacher to coach, as well as setting up her own business as a young South Asian lady. It's definitely a conversation not to be missed. So it gives me great pleasure in welcoming QPR lead foundation phase football coach, Manisha Tailor. Manisha, welcome to the Sports Stories podcast. Thanks for showing some interest and giving up your time today. It's really great to have you on board. As you well know, we've been sort of communicating over the last couple of weeks or so over social media. We've not met before, but I think we found a connection in terms of the worlds that we work in and also common philosophy. And one of the things that really excited me about connecting with you and speaking to you is about the environment that you work in and also your story, your background, and some of the work that you have planned going forward. The key thing for me, though, however, is whenever I introduce a guest is to allow my guests to share who they are and tell them a little bit about themselves so the audience can really get a sense of who we're talking to today. So as a starter, can you just give us an insight as to what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for allowing me to share my story. So my background's in primary education. I qualified as a primary school teacher in 2001, and at the time actually had no interest or didn't envision myself working in football full time as I do now, and through the years, I found myself noticing that actually in primary schools, particularly around that time, you didn't really have that many teachers that were equipped and felt confident enough to be able to take on after school clubs in and around football specifically. And it's a lot better now, particularly when I speak to a lot of my colleagues who are still teaching, with regards to the gender imbalance with primary school teachers who are male to female. But certainly when I was teaching, there was many more females than there were male teachers. And I've always loved football. I've grown up loving football. Me and my twin brother played football, at primary school and as we were growing up. But so when I was growing up, in the 80s, there certainly were not many females playing football. And I remember my primary school teacher actually saying to me that, oh, you can play for the school, but there was an opportunity for me to also play for Mill Hill. And funnily enough, I'm 4'9", but actually I was a goalkeeper at the time.
Brilliant.
So definitely something went wrong along the way, because there definitely wouldn't be a keeper now. And she said that, but if you do decide to play for Mill Hill, you can't play for the school. And, you're an 8 or a 9-year-old and you just think, oh no, I'd love to play with my friends, my best friend Jenna. And it was for me, playing for the school team was a be all and end all. So that was pretty much it. You just get on with it. I went to secondary school and so this was, I went into secondary school, probably 92. And again, very few opportunities for females to play. And I remember speaking to my PE teacher and asked him why we didn't have any girls' football teams or girls' football clubs. And just the simple answer really is that there isn't a need, and there isn't a need because there actually aren't that many girls that want to play. So me and Jenna went to separate schools, but then Claire also loved football, who I became friends with in my secondary school. And we were pretty much the only two girls who play in our school uniform. But in terms of wider opportunities to progress, perhaps as a player, I recognise that there were very few opportunities, that there really wasn't a pathway as developed as it is now, which I think is brilliant for young girls and for women. But one of the things that I really started to think about was the ethnicity imbalance. And actually, I'm South Asian, so I'm Indian. And my parents were more than happy for me to play football when I was growing up, but as long as it was attached to school because of the school element. And for them to have to take me to a club, whether it's a grassroots club or any other setup, that was a big deal. And it was a big deal for them because of how they felt they would be perceived within the community, particularly at that time. And I remember going to trials for Barnet, the Girls' Centre of Excellence, when I was 9, and Jenna was there. And so Jenna's mum took me. Her mum said to my mum, "Don't worry, I'll take her there." And I got in, and it was it would never go to it was never going to go to fruition because, again, for my mum, it was a commitment of, I have to take you on the weekends, but more so it was the community element and the stereotypes around South Asian girls playing football. So, you're upset for a little while, and then you just get over it because you're a 9-10-year-old.
What was it like? Can you recall, what was it like when you first went?
Yeah, I was, when I first went for the trial, or when... So I remember it was in a school hall. Actually, it was in a hall because I remember it, and I scored. I'm left-footed, and I remember taking it on my right side, and I happened to score. And I thought, how on earth did I do that? But anyhow, the coach thought yes, and then he said to me, "You're in." And then I thought, God, now I've got to tell my mum. And at the time, I was upset for a while. And I was upset because I really wanted to play. And at that time, I couldn't quite understand the stereotypes and this thing around how it would be perceived by others. Because in my head, it was very much, I don't care, I just want to play. But now when I look back on it, 30 odd years old, that it's, those stereotypes and the taboo and balance, we've definitely moved ahead. And I think that there's a pathway now. And I think that the generation, if we're looking at ethnicity wise, I certainly think that it'd be my generation or my sister's 13 years younger. So my sister's generation who, when they have kids, they would be equally promoting sport as a professional or a career. Whereas for my mum and my dad and my grandparents, that was definitely not the thing that you do. And for them, it was just because of their upbringing and how they perceived the world to be. And, like I said, that I look now and I think, I am in football, and circumstance took me out of working full time in 2011. Because through my teaching career, I was really focused on wanting to be a good teacher, wanting to be a good senior leader. And I got in my last role, I was a deputy head and I was a trainee head because I got onto the national qualification for headship. Right. And my vision really was, I want to be able to have sport as a massive part of my school eventually.
So was your first kind of career move then after kind of education into following down a teacher pathway? Is that correct?
So my career move actually came as a result of me trying to complete my master's, which I was doing an MA in leadership at the time, because that would complement my headship diploma. Okay. My mum also had a triple heart bypass, and I became a young carer for my twin brother when we were 18, and he needs absolute one-to-one care. So there was just a lot going on at the same time. So I just thought the best thing for me to do would be to complete my contract to the summer and then take a school term out so I could do the things that I needed to do with the view of get a job for January the following year. However, through the time, what I was able to do was to liaise with football governing bodies and people in football, but purely through my role in teaching, because those who know primary schools and been in and around primary schools know that you pretty much be head of every department that there is. So one of my roles through my career was being in charge of extended schools. And as part of that, the school that I happened to work in at that time was in Wembley, and we were neighbouring Wembley Stadium. Wow. So Rachel Yankee, who played for England, played for Arsenal, she had a link with our school. And she spoke to me. So we did some work around looking at children who were underachieving but loved sport and how we could influence their education through football. And she spoke to me actually because what I did do was I set up after school clubs and lunchtime clubs for the girls and then for the boys, and not with any qualifications. I didn't have any coaching badges. I just did what I thought was best at the time. But one of the things I would say is that unless you know, you don't know. So I don't come from football first. I don't come from that environment. Yeah. So I was unaware that you could actually go and gain qualifications.
Right.
And Rachel then made me aware that actually, you could go to the county FA, just go on the website, and then you could get a level 1 and so on. So that then led me to get my level 1, then work towards my level 2. And I was still teaching full time at the time. And I then began, as well as doing the schools coaching, while I was teaching, I then began coaching for Rachel at her grassroots community club on the weekend.
So Manisha, you're saying such a lot here, and I'm thinking, wow. So you were leading you were a senior leader within the school. You were a coach. You were setting up all the after school clubs. You were caring as well at home. Am I correct in hearing you were doing all of these sort of things, all juggling them at the same time?
Yeah. And actually, the schools that I had worked in didn't know about my brother. Okay. They didn't know. And I look back now, and one of my learnings and something that I'd say for other people would be, you have to share, because what I didn't want to do is to be judged. And that was a big thing for me, that I want to be good at my job. I really want to learn and I want to get better. And I had a lot of frustration because, my brother's condition came as a result of trauma and bullying when he was at school. Okay. And it was really hard for me because, you're born with somebody, and his condition now is such that he only talks to the voices he hears, but he cannot communicate verbally as we do.
Wow.
So up until 18, we did everything together, and he was my best friend. I talked to him all the time and that kind of thing. We shared similar friendships, circles, and now all of a sudden, there comes a point where he's developing psychosis. There's depression. There's elements of schizophrenia, and you're going from somebody who we would say is a normal child or person,
young person,
to somebody now who cannot even recognize who you are. And that's a big change. And my sister was only 5 at the time, because there's a big age gap between us. So there was a lot to deal with. And the only thing that kept me focused was looking at my mum and just thinking, I can't break down, because if I do that, she's going to break down, and we need to keep this together somehow. So I thought by letting it known to others at work, I would get judged, and that then maybe affect me progressing. I wanted to continue as a senior leader, and and when jobs were coming up to be an assistant or a deputy, I wanted to be good enough to be able to apply, and I just felt at the time that if they, particularly where mental health wasn't spoken about. So there's so many factors here. You've got an area of taboo, then the fact that we're from the South Asian community, and in my head, if I'm honest, I was still trying to comprehend what's going on. I don't really understand this. We've never experienced this before. So, you're dealing with a mixture of things here. And, he was sectioned, and we're talking about extreme trauma of a child. And that certainly, I feel for me, these experiences, and I'll share those in a moment with the trauma, have shaped me as a teacher when I was teaching the young people in the school and as a coach.
So just holding you on that point, I'm really curious as to, what was it like in that time when you came to sharing your views? Because, the worlds that we both work in nowadays, that word about sharing stuff and some people holding back and some people giving out is a fine balance for many people. And I'm just wondering, how was it when you did share it and people did become known as to what was going on for you?
I actually only shared it quite recently. So when I say recent, I'd say probably about six, seven, say recent, since my career, just after my career change, actually. So that's probably now about good seven, 8 years.
Wow.
But it was when I came out of education, and I'll tell you why. The reason I shared it was because I wanted to reconnect with football to help my brother. And I knew, and I just felt it. I don't know how I knew, but I did. I felt that I could help him because physically he was fine. So I thought, hold on a minute, I started to develop I started to develop other work through football when I was freelancing. And I thought to myself, there's got to be a way of being able to connect with my brother and use other forms of communication. And he loved football and physically he was fine. So my focus then became on, okay, how can I help him? And selfishly, I wasn't thinking about anybody else at the time. It was really about, okay, what else can I do? So I set up my brand. I then linked up with Wingate and Finchley Football Club, which are my local non-league club. Right. In fact, I live right opposite the club, and they were already running a mental health and disability program voluntarily. Yeah. So I spoke to them, and through a conversation, we then decided, actually, can we start something within our borough of Barnet? And it would be predominantly for people like my brother who have extreme needs where they do need absolute one-to-one, because there were several projects that other people in football who were fantastic actually did speak to me about when they found out my story, people who I'd connected with. With coaches and tutors, and they said, do know that this borough runs this county does this. One of the difficulties were that if you're not within the catchment, you can't actually access the support. Right. So those who live within a catchment or within the borough, you really have to seek support. Yeah. That's within nearby where you live. And unfortunately, within Barnet, I was struggling to find things. Struggling to find sporting activities.
I'm correct in hearing that you accessed the football because it was a language which really was able to help you connect with your brother and therefore help other people with similar needs.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the great thing about football and sport as a whole, it's a universal language. Right. So anybody can engage and participate in football. And then that's a fantastic thing about it. And when we started, this partnership with, when I say we, I see it as a joint with me and my brother. When we started this with Wingate, there were only 2, and then there were 3, and then there were 4. And what was great was you had those with real severe needs that my brother has, and you could really see how the care workers were now consciously having to think about creative ways in connecting with those that they work with, because one is the person who may have the mental health problem or the disability, and the other is you've got the angle of the care worker. Yeah. So they're also, the connection's vital, and the connection's really important. And
can you give an example of something that stands out for you?
Yeah, there was a female care worker who didn't really like football, but the way that she would communicate and connect with the person she was working with was had a lot of care and was fantastic. And it was just working with her and showing her, because what I then did was, I linked up with Middlesex FA County, who were providing some support. And Byron, he came to come and help with some coaching. It was actually just us providing tools and techniques. And I always say I'm by no means a disability expert. I don't have qualifications in those areas or in psychology. I have been within this care environment with my brother for 22 years. So I can only go on that, and perhaps I draw upon my teaching experiences. And the way that she connected and the way that she was then able to just forget the fact that she didn't like football, but throw and catch, do basic things. And she found that she was then also, having a positive experience. And when we talk about mental health, it's not negative. You've also got positive mental health, because as well as, it impacting particularly sport and football, being a great thing for physical and mental well-being, but the social interactions and the emotional connections you get, I think are brilliant.
What would you say you have really brought and transferred across from your educational world into the sport world? What are the learnings that you brought with you, do you think, that would help somebody in a similar place that's listening in?
I think it's definitely got to be an understanding of pedagogy and learning, and understanding stages of learning, and the fact that seeing the players as children before footballers. Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that unless you're in the competitive or performance arena where you're working with, like some first team players as an example, you're working in development, and these are young children. And I think sometimes what can happen is they can be perceived to be mini footballers straight away. And yeah, they are there to be footballers. So particularly when you're working within an academy, there is an outcome, and there is a certain element of competition because of the nature of the system. However, they are still children, and they need to be coached and taught in that way. And I think also there's a big difference between being able to have all this football knowledge in your head and being able to teach and disseminate that information. That's a skill in itself.
Wow. So go on and give us some tips, or what are the key elements of that learning? Because again, you're resonating for me on so many points here, because part of the work I'm been fortunate to do over the last few years is to work in the Paralympic environment, and therefore working in with people with varying different needs. And then you've also brought in the dynamic here of working with young people. And so coming from an educational background into coaching, whether it be in a disability sport or a mental health arena or with young people, there must be some common themes. What would you say they are that come from the education world?
I think the common themes are around how you engage with people and finding tools and techniques that work. And then, it's just ensuring that that's individualized to meet the individual needs of whoever the child or the player is. And one of the things that definitely helped me towards gaining my role as lead foundation phase is the fact that I did have this experience. So one is having strategic experience, and you're coming into, where you're now managing a phase and you're managing staff. And the other is around learning. And then it's about, the great thing about my head of coaching, Chris Ramsey, is that he sees potential, not just in players, but also in people. And it was then, how can I then help her develop and become a better coach? Because I don't come from football first, I come from another environment. But what he did look at was what can she offer, because she can coach. I had my B license, and that, and I had the qualifications that were required. However, what I didn't have were the coaching hours that perhaps the other coaches had, simply because when they were coaching, I was in another field.
You were in learning, weren't you? You were in the learning field.
I was in the learning field, yeah. And what I did find myself doing when I was part-time for 2 seasons before I became full-time was, so I had the under-9s for two seasons, and Chris was great because he's very open to ideas, as long as it aligns to the philosophy of the club, and he can show, and that we can show. So I was able to to justify why I felt this could help the players. So I'll give you some examples of techniques and strategies. So for example, I've got these small little football boots, and what I did was with the Velcro, I laminated tags and I labeled it like inside, outside, sole, and that kind of thing, so they could, Velcro the labels. And it was, and so that was just one, and that pretty much could be used for anything, passing, dribbling, or that kind of thing. Within our philosophy that Chris put in place, what I did was create drawings and pictures and word cards, and then I'd have that laminated and I'd put it up on the board. So what I'd always be doing is more about, when we think about the characteristics of children, particularly if you look at the 9s to 11s, some of them are around fear of failure, developing stronger relationships, but two of the ones that I'll draw upon are around being egocentric and not wanting to share, but not because they don't like to share, but purely because they haven't developed the cognitive capacity to understand it's not just about me here. So in their head, it is about me, and I just want the ball, and I just want the ball on my own, and the enthusiasm and being excitable. So in order for them to develop, particularly that age, we need to give them repetition and rehearsal. So what I was able to do was link that to our philosophy in relation to language. So we've got our technical program, but this was just adding another element. So for instance, by constantly being able to reference and look at the words, they were learning the words. And then it was developing that into the connection with, what does this look like when you're now doing the skill? What does this look like when you're now up against an opponent, or what does this look like within the game? So, like I said, for me, one of the good things is that I've got a head of coaching who actually also has a teaching degree.
Okay, I was going to ask that question.
Yes.
How were you received in that environment, bringing in these different approaches? Let me put it that way.
With Chris, I was seen as, you can try it as long as I can justify why. And it was then, it was almost like a trial and error, see how it goes, because it was seen as different by others. And through the seasons, anyhow, it soon catched on. And, then when I became foundation phase lead, and what we were then doing together with the other lead phase coaches, well, was almost producing visual resources for the kids. And I feel that the next stage to that now, though, is being able to teach how you enable the children to learn with these resources, because you can have things up on the board, whether it's words or pictures and that kind of thing, but being able to engage with the children and teach that is another skill. So I wouldn't say that we're entirely there yet with that. Yeah. But what I would say is two things. One is I think that what the youth modules now do with coaching is actually give people who haven't come from that learning environment an opportunity to be able to learn some of those skills and actually learn more about how young players develop. I think for me as a learning tool, it's definitely been reflecting on actually everyone has different strengths. And for me, it was quite automatic on, I'm going to create this scaffold for their learning journals to help the under nines. Like I would draw a picture and I would, but that's because I was doing that for more than 10 years in education. And a reflection for me was actually thinking about, you've got people who've been in football and haven't been taught in that way. So that definitely for me was a learning tool with regards to actually, I think that you need to look at the skill set and the strengths of different people. And actually what you can do, like I said, with Chris, it's great because he also comes from an educational background, and our philosophy has been built around how children learn and stages of learning. So I'm quite fortunate there, but I think being able to complement skills with others is a great thing. And I think for me, that's certainly what helped in enabling me to gain the role that I'm in now. And now for me, it's just, it's continuing to develop
And I guess I'm hearing it also, as you implement these new and different ways into the club or into the environment, it's going to take some time to settle and embed. Are you beginning to see some positive outcomes? Do you see the benefit and the difference it's making, do you think?
I mean, from the age groups that I've worked with, I'd like to think that they've gained a better understanding of the philosophy. They've been a lot more resourceful. Okay. So one of the things that I used to do a lot of work around when I was teaching was using Guy Claxton's model of, he called it the 6 R's of learning. But one of those R's is around being resourceful. And what I feel that this does is it allows the players those opportunities. So whether it's using huddle and analysis, whether it's using the whiteboard with the pictures, whether it's using cue cards, I don't see it as it's an overload of information, because actually what you'll do is you will tailor it to who you've got. Mm-hmm. And what we have to do though is make sure that we do provide the players a resource base to draw upon, and then they can take what they need from it.
And I hear, Manisha, as well, we're beginning to, or you are really beginning to try and embed a philosophy of helping the young people learn how to learn, rather than it's just the football. It's actually these are processes by which you're embedding in them. So when there's a lot of talk, isn't there, in the sport world about actually growing individual people as opposed to just players. And I think is that the philosophy you're playing to, and that actually the football comes along with this, but actually you're giving these people life skills. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. For me, the metacognition's a big part of, say, my belief, and that within my club environment translates certainly in a different way, but there are opportunities there for players to be able to reflect, right, and to be able to develop as people as well as just footballers. And I think that what's really important is that, as much as you've got the players there for a reason, and they'll be at a professional football club because they're good enough to be there, and they have a dream, and their dream is to be professional footballers, which is why there's a commitment from them and there's a commitment from the parents. And I think that we have to give them every opportunity to succeed, whatever that may look like. So for some, that might be perhaps playing for the first team of that club. That might be playing any other salaried football. That might be gaining a career abroad, or that might just be education and developing other skills, which they can then take after their football life is finished. So I think that this whole, when we're talking about the whole player, yes, there's the technical, physical aspect, but there's a lot of talk now around the psychosocial model. And for me, definitely within my values and my beliefs, thinking about the thinking is a massive part of that. And what that does, like you said, is it develops the life skills that the players need for their later life.
Right. Well, we'll come back to the sort of the psych and social aspects, but just before we go there, you also mentioned parents, and with this model that you're bringing in and the age group that you work with, how do you engage with the parents and bring them along with your philosophy and approach? So,
I think being honest and having honest communication, open communication with the parents, really important. So one of the things that we do at the club is we have several meetings throughout the season. So there would be an open a meeting to begin with, in introducing them to the environment, the philosophy, and then there's meetings throughout. But I think not all meetings need to be formal, and you have to be approachable, that the parents need to know fundamentally that you care about their child and that you've got their child's development at the heart of it. And I think that comes with your connection with their child and the way in which you connect with them as parents. Because what we have to remember is there's a big commitment from them. They, you look and you wonder, how on earth do you actually manage with perhaps other siblings, going to work, managing with other things in life, and still bring your child to training on time 3 times a week, give up your weekends? You could have a game. So, you could have a game where you have to do a commute of 3 to 4 hours round trip. That's your Sunday over, and if it's particularly where there are other siblings, that can be a real strain. So I think also it's just recognizing and remembering that there's families in this commitment. It's not just the player. And as much as we want to develop the player, it's taking that into consideration.
And if you were to flip the coin and suggest, we could give the parents some guidance or some information to really help you, what guidance might we give them? How could they best help their son, daughter progress through a talent pathway? So
I think the first thing is to remember that as much as for some it may be that your dream is being lived through your child, that can put a lot of pressure on the child. And it's thinking about, again, what the characteristics and makeup of a child are. They want to learn. They've got a lot of enthusiasm. They're extremely excitable, and they want to be in an environment that allows them to take risks without fear of failure. And if the parents can manage the pressure, if we're talking about an academy environment, if the parents can assist in helping their child manage the environment by being positive, by thinking about their questioning, allowing their child to share as opposed to telling their child what they should have done, and trusting the process, and fundamentally trusting the coaches and the club to do the best for their child, I think that will then help their child along the journey.
Wow, some powerful stuff, and it is such a passionate arena, isn't it? Where people always want the best for the child, and the coaches want the best. So it's a fine balance. And one of the things you picked up earlier on, which I'm particularly interested to just come back to, is around your mental health, your brother's mental health, players' mental health. It's an area which is really prevalent at the moment, and I'm wondering, in a broader sense, just to widen it out, what's your views on mental health in the sporting arena at the moment?
So if I think, I go back to when we were talking about my brother, his is a real rare and extreme case.
Right.
So as part of his bullying, he was kidnapped by his bullies. We had no idea. He was missing for 3 days. There was real trauma, and that trauma has manifested in him developing psychosis and having so much fear that he just does not talk unless it's to the voices that he hears. So that's a very rare and unique case. However, the learnings from that have certainly taught me and told me that when we're working with young people, what we have to remember is that the learning environment that we create will allow them to flourish. So we want to be able to create an environment that allows them to talk freely, to communicate. If they have a problem or something's gone on, that they don't feel that they can't come and talk to their coach. Like I would be mortified if one that the children thought she doesn't care, and the other one that we can't come and talk to her. And it may not be you, because it may be that they feel more comfortable talking to somebody else. Mm-hmm. But I just think that the environment and the culture has to be such that one that promotes open discussion. And there's a quote actually about a flower, which is one that it's one of my favorite quotes. And it's, if the flower doesn't bloom, you change the environment in which it grows. And fundamentally, you don't try to fix the flower, because what we want to do is be able to develop the child. And if the child isn't developing, first and foremost, you need to look at yourself, your behaviors, your actions. Is that impacting on the child's development? And actually, your ego should come from developing the child and caring about the child. And if there is an impact, then you need to try and adapt and change that. Because how else will the players develop? How else will the children learn? So I think when we're talking about mental health within a sporting environment, the environment and the culture within the clubs have to be such that it allows for open discussion, and the players are encouraged to talk and take risks and communicate without the fear of failure.
How are we doing with that, do you think?
I think that things are getting better, and I think particularly within a competitive environment, they're getting better. And I say that because there is a lot more education for those who work within those environments, and you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So everything's about learning, but you have to be open to that learning.
Yeah.
So I think you've got it on twofold. One is that they're probably still a cohort who I've done it this way, and therefore I'm going to continue to do it this way. But you've also got a cohort of people who are willing to be open, who I've done it this way, but actually I want to evolve and I want to adapt. Yeah. And I think that because there's a lot more education, whether it's through the FA, whether it's through counties, whether it's through those not directly football related, people are now becoming a lot more educated and equipped with some of the skills, because ultimately we are not all going to be experts in those areas. But what we want to be able to do is have some foundation to help the children, and we can then seek advice from experts if there are any problems going forward. So if you're in a position where you can notice signs and symptoms, it could be, as an example, a young player might be suffering from bereavement. His behaviour patterns might have changed. Now, if you're somebody who's been given a firm foundation or some education around actually what do you notice, so we're looking at noticing skills, what are the signs and the symptoms, they can then, if they feel through their observations that actually it's a cause for concern, now you go to the experts. But I think fundamentally the coach is the psychologist. That in my opinion, the coach is the psychologist. You work with this player all the time. You are the most closely connected to this player and can heavily influence their actions and their behaviours. So
I would even nearly broaden that out for me. As you're speaking, I'm reflecting there and thinking, actually, we're all psychologists, really, or we play to my you play to my favourite word, or one of my words at the moment, which is about noticing. And if we're to carry around ourselves and notice what's going on for the people that we're involved in, whether it be football, cricket, netball, hockey, in the primary school classroom, that's a key part, isn't it? To notice what's going on for people and changes in behaviours, and then actually act and go to the expert. Is that what you're saying? Because I'm
100%. Yeah, I think, like I said, I've said before that I'm by no means an expert in those fields, but I don't think we are. And why should we be? Because we're experts within our own fields. Because we do have a close connection with the players, it is our duty and our responsibility to notice and to be aware. And I think fundamentally what's crucial is that we do something about it once we notice. And it might not even be a cause for concern. It might be, I'm not really sure about this. That's where you go to the experts and you ask questions, go to your league phases, go to your academy, go. And it doesn't, like I said, there are many clubs who don't have trained experts across different departments. So it's go to trusted people, go to people you trust and make sure you let them know.
It's nearly playing back to a word for me that you used earlier on, which was share again. You talked about your experience of sharing where you were at or what was going on. And actually if you notice something, share it with somebody, preferably somebody that's got a good insight into that domain. But it's actually about communicating because you never quite know. Is that, again, something that you're advocating?
Yeah, definitely. I think that open communication is important, not just the relationship between you and the player, but you and the other members of staff. And coaches can change age groups and work across the spectrum with different players. So unless things are confidential, I think it is important that there is an awareness of players across your phase, particularly if, like certainly at QPR, that the coaches work across the age groups within the phase. So I think it's really important that there is an awareness, like I said, unless it's confidential, of things that can then help the player.
Well, Manisha, you've said a couple of times here that, I'm not the expert, but what always strikes me as we're talking here is about the exposure you've had to so many different experiences, and I think part of what I'm drawn to try and pull out within the Sports Stories sort of podcast is hearing people's experiences, because they're so valuable and insightful and spark off different things with different people. So, I just want to celebrate, the challenging times that you've shared and the experiences you've had have formulated your thinking, and I think that's it's really worth listening to and acknowledging. It's not to say that you're right, but it's actually to respect that you've actually lived a journey and actually listened to yourself and watched yourself and been humble enough to say we've got things right and we've got things wrong, and I just want to sort of celebrate that. It would be a miss of me not to also ask you about something that you mentioned right at the beginning, which was around, the imbalance in terms of women in sport, but also Asian women in sport. And I'm just wondering, could you share any thoughts around that just before we begin to wrap up towards the end?
I think I began to notice that there is an imbalance within the professional game, especially when I started to work part-time at the academy. So I'd been at Middlesex at the Girls Centre of Excellence. I didn't really notice it. Didn't really notice it then. I did actually, when I was working in schools, I did notice there was an imbalance in terms of ethnicity with senior leaders. Yeah. Not that many ethnic minority senior leaders. And at that time, I remember being put on courses for Black and Asian minority ethnic communities, like leadership courses. And when I joined QPR, I thought to myself, I actually know why now. I know why. Because at the time, I couldn't comprehend it. And I didn't really understand. And perhaps that's because I spent a long time working across schools in a demographic that's very diverse. Worked in Ealing, I worked in Brent. They're very diverse boroughs. Yeah. Although my last post was in Hillingdon, it was from then, and then coming into QPR, that I really thought, wow, first of all, where are the women? And second of all, there are very few, in fact, hardly any South Asian women. And I'm at a fantastic club where you've got diversity across the board, from the owners to the director of football to our head of coaching to to coaching staff. So I'm quite fortunate, and although I say that, and like I said, I'm at a great club where I'm learning, and I'm learning so much from Alex Carroll, our academy director, and Chris Ramsey, our head of coaching. But I still found it very challenging to manage the environment. And I'm the only South Asian female working in a professional football club. And then I'm the only South Asian female working in a professional football club full time. So it's lonely. It's really lonely, because you're looking for people that you can draw upon and lean on. And I'm not saying that you have to come from an ethnic minority background to have empathy. I'm not saying that at all. However, for me personally, I've found it extremely challenging. And there have been occasions where I felt that I've been undermined, that there's been occasions where I've had to have challenging conversations. And I don't think that that's a fault of any individuals. Yeah. What I do think needs to happen is there needs to be greater education within football culture. And it's definitely just not my experience. I feel that this is probably shared experiences for many other women within my position.
So for people that do share your experiences, because I do hear these stories often myself, so I really want to resonate with what you're saying, is what guidance or tips or what bits of help might you be able to share that might help some people from your experiences? How have you managed yourself?
So I mean, look, for me, like I said, that because of because I feel that I'm in a place and I'm at a club where I can have open conversations.
Yeah.
It's what's really benefited is that I've been able to be open and honest with Chris, and I've been able to be open and honest with Alex. And it was about providing me with tools and strategies on how I can ultimately, to begin with, manage the environment. I'm coming from an environment that's very female dominated. I was managing female staff. I'm now taking a transition into an environment that's very different to education, as in operationally. It's also male orientated, and I'm now managing
nearly the polar opposite, isn't it?
It's a polar opposite. It's a polar opposite. So, what I initially needed to do, and I think we spoke about humility before. It's important to recognize where you're at. So I've got enough humility to say, that it's a new environment, and I know that I'm still learning within the environment. But it is about learning and getting better. But as long as you're self-aware of what it is you need to work on. So they said to me, with regards to managing the environment, it was focusing on managing relationships, different techniques and strategies on managing staff. The ECAS that I'm on has certainly helped with that as well, which has been great. And I feel better. So, kind of moving a season on from that, I feel better for it. And although, I'll be honest enough to say that I'm still in a place where I'm still learning the environment, but I feel that the more open that we can be around how we feel and how it affects us, I think we'll be in a better place. So, like I said, that I feel that football culture needs education around how we can readdress the balance so that we don't continue to have people like me and others who do feel lonely and intimidated within a majority, because I am a minority within a majority. And what we want to do is try and change that, not in a tokenistic way, because we certainly want the best people for the job. You want, however, I think there's a lot to be done, particularly in the professional game, until that happens.
I mean, part of our conversation today is to help that educational journey, isn't it? By sharing these stories. So, again, just wanted to applaud your openness, your humility, and the way in which you've articulated your journey. Because I think by individuals understanding that, it goes part way to people, putting themselves in your shoes. And, you're doing a very great job of doing your best to put yourselves in other people's shoes. So it goes both ways, doesn't it? And I think, celebrating again that we're here sharing that story. So on that note, I want to just take us to a little bit more of a functional place, which is about really giving some tips and some direction to the listeners. So I'm going to fire one or two questions at you, and I want you to come with your gut instinct, if that's all right. So okay. I'm going to ask you, could you outline 3 or 4 books that have really influenced you along your way, or that you would be your go-to books to guide you or guide our listeners in their journey?
So the top one for me is Mindset by Carol Dweck. Right. And there's another book that two actually. So Soccer Tough by Dan Abraham, and The Goldmine Effect. So those 3 for me, all quite different, actually. But the psychology around football and thinking has been, I think for me has been really important.
Yeah, powerful. Good books, and I like the idea of also similar but different, aren't they, from different lenses? I guess, which is great. Technology. You've worked in education, you've worked in football, very different environments. What technology or piece of software has really been your lifesaver, would you say, or your go-to?
My laptop.
Well.
I'm glued. My laptop is my lifesaver. I'm glued to my laptop and my tablet, because one of the things that I've noticed that is useful for the players is being able to show them, like, if for instance we're in the changing room, being able to show them clips on Huddle through a tablet. Right. So my tablet and my laptop.
And you use Huddle for your players quite often, is it? As a piece of software, do you find that one of your key go-to softwares in your day job, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, look, not as I think we would like to use it, but it's certainly it's a tool that we use.
Great stuff. Good stuff. Next question. I was blown away by the roles that you play. So you're a full-time lead foundation phase coach, but you've also got some big challenges going on in your personal environment. You had come from an educational environment. You work many hours. You've got your own business going or your own brand developing. How do you prepare yourself to perform at your best? What kind of relaxation or preparedness do you take?
So I go to the gym 4 to 5 times a week, and I find that half an hour, so not very long, but that for me is just a time where I just don't answer the phone, don't look at the phone. It's just a time for me, just me time, and that really helps. And some reading before going to bed. I find that also is quite therapeutic.
What sort of reading?
I really enjoy learning about learning. So I mentioned like Guy Claxton, and there's a couple of like educational psychologists who've got some books. So I'm really fascinated about models of learning and development. So I kind of go on Google when I'll have research to just learn.
Yeah, being a bit of a learning geek, reading.
Yeah.
Great stuff. What advice would you give to your teenage self?
I would say have the humility to know where you are in order for you to get to where you want to be.
Wow. Sounds really powerful and really thought through. Next question, 2 more to go. Can you name 3 people that have really impacted on your life?
Okay, so Chris Ramsey.
Yeah.
Alex Welsh. 3 is really hard. So I'm going to base this around my career purely because I feel as a minority within what I'm doing, it's been extremely challenging. Matthew Joseph.
And can you just say a little bit about those 3 in terms of what they've done for you, for those people that might not know who they are?
So Chris Ramsey for me is he's somebody that I inspire to want to be like. I just see him as one of the best player developers in the country, and the learning that I am getting under his tuition is phenomenal. And I'm fortunate that he's accelerating me in my learning, right. Which means that you're sprinting. But the fact that he explains things, he spends time, and he's got all this knowledge from being a player, from being at the stuff that he's done at Tottenham, from his time when he was also teaching, that I can draw upon. And I'll be open and I'll say this: if it's not for Chris Ramsey, I haven't got an opportunity to come and volunteer at QPR. If it's not for the volunteering opportunity, I haven't got a job at QPR. So I'll always be loyal to people who have, given those opportunities and who've been visionary. And for me, he's definitely somebody who's forward thinking and looks beyond protected characteristics and actually seeks people who would be best for those jobs.
Wow, powerful stuff. Can you give us a quick synopsis for the other 2 as well?
So Alex Welsh, I've known Alex for many, many years, and he put me on the level 2 pathway and has helped me ever since then. So since 2009, and he's been extremely helpful with regards to me developing as a coach. And Matthew Joseph, equally more so with some of the youth modules. So he's been brilliant. And along with Matty, I'll also say Peter Agustin, who gave me some volunteering opportunities when he was academy manager at Hampton and Richmond. So there's been some great people out there who've really helped me and are continuing to help me along the way.
And you paint a lovely picture for me again about those people that have opened doors, but also those people that have inspired and challenged you through them as well. So it's not just about opening doors. And when they open the door, it's also about them really backing you and showing a level of both challenge and care. I'm getting a real sense that these people really care for taking you on the journey to be the best football coach you can be, irrespective of your ethnicity, your gender, whoever. They want you to be the best at your job. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say in a nutshell, you need to fight for yourself, but you need people to fight for you. And those that I've mentioned, and there are many others who do that. And I'm grateful that they do, because that is allowing me to learn and develop. And I'm fortunate that they do see potential in continuing to help me develop.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And my very last question then, Manisha, would be, whose sports story would you like to hear and why?
I would actually like to hear Hope Powell's sports story. There's two. Am I allowed to say two?
Of course you can. Yeah. You're breaking the boundaries here again, but there we go.
Okay. So I would like to hear Hope Powell and Kate Howie's stories. Reason being, both have had to fight, and both have had to go through adversity and challenges within their own right to be respected and regarded as females within sport. And Hope, for me, an inspiration within football, and Kate Howie, for me, who's also my mentor, but the first female head coach of Team GB. I was able to lean on her with regards to managing male staff and how different that is. And I would love to hear their journey and some of the experiences that they've gone through that I could then maybe draw upon.
Great stuff. Really powerful and really thought through, reasoned people as well. There's a real story, or there's a real need or want and a desire to understand, other people's journeys and the value that they can bring to you. And for me, you've epitomized throughout our conversation today just the importance of sharing your story to help others, but also watching other people's stories and learning from theirs. I think that this learning journey for you has very much been a two-way cycle. And I've written down here on my sheet of paper in front of me about fighting for yourself, and given that I've never met you before, and the story you've told today, there is definitely a sense of you've definitely fought for yourself along the way through the highs and the lows. And I just again wanted to thank you for that, applaud you for that, and sharing some of the real personal stuff around your family situation, the work that you've done with your brother, and how you've actually used that as a fantastic catalyst, especially coming towards, where mental health is becoming such an important issue to discuss and to work with and engage in, whether it be in sports, whether it just be in football, whether it be in, I think in society as a whole, it's becoming such a much more spoken about topic and probably needs so much more energy put to it still. So on that note, I'd just really like to thank you, Manisha, for sharing everything. My last throwaway to you would be, going forward, you're clearly, this is not the end of your journey. This is a part step along the way. How might people who are listening get in touch with you or find out more about what you're doing and engage in some of the great work that you continue to do?
Yeah, so through Twitter and through Instagram, it's at Swaggarlicious, which is my company, or my website, which is www.swaggarlicious.com.
Brilliant. Well, what we'll do, we'll make sure that those details go on the little show notes at the bottom of the podcast. So if people didn't write them down, they can pick them up after the show. But on that note, thank you ever so much for being with me today. I've really, really enjoyed it. Good luck. And I look forward to having you on the show again at some stage. And I'm sure we can get sort of episode number 2 or part 2 of the journey. But thanks again, Manisha. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
We have the sports story of Manisha Tailor. It was a conversation that lived up to everything I'd hoped and even more. It's really made me consider the impact the close relationships I have on me. Hearing Manisha's story about her twin brother and how he was so badly bullied and the resulting actions she has taken was incredible. In her very humble way, she has also made me consider the concepts of learning and overcoming adversity. The learning she has taken from her experiences was incredible as a carer, as a teacher and as a coach. Furthermore, the learning she continues to do now and going forward, which she is driving. And also, how does she help those she works with in the academy learn, as both a coach and a teacher? So the 2 questions I'd like to pose today are, what adverse experiences have you had that you can recall the positive learning you gained? And given our focus on mental health, what do you need to put in place to make sure you develop and maintain a positive mental health? These are both big questions that I would love to hear your thoughts and reflections on. Furthermore, if you would like to talk through some of the issues raised by Manisha's story, then please make contact with me at sportstories247@gmail.com. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's podcast and it's given you some food for thought. Further details will be on the show notes below the podcast. Also, please join me next week for another great guest, and it would be really appreciated if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts if that's where you're listening, as this would help others find and gain the value from the Sports Stories podcast. So from me, Dave Levine, until next week, look after yourself, and I look forward to having you join me again soon.